Out past Neptune, where sunlight is just a pale ghost of what it is near Earth, a ship drifted. It wasn't human. It moved slow, steady, and quiet. So quiet that even the best sensors on the outer solar monitoring stations almost missed it. No radio chatter. No engine flares. Just a dark shape gliding through the ice and dust of the Kuiper Belt like it belonged there. Aboard the UNS Persephone, a small UN deep space patrol vessel, the crew had been running routine scans for weeks. Nothing unusual, just the usual cosmic background noise, the occasional comet, and the distant hum of automated mining drones near Pluto. Then, at 03:17 ship time, the long-range LiDAR pinged something massive, dense, and utterly unknown. It wasn't on any registry. It didn't match debris patterns, and it wasn't answering hails. The commander of the Persephone, a woman with 20 years in deep space and eyes that had seen both beauty and horror beyond Earth's atmosphere, studied the readouts in silence. Her hands rested lightly on the console, calm on the outside, but inside her mind raced. First rule of deep space protocol: assume nothing. Second rule: never provoke. Third, if it looks alien, treat it like it could vanish or explode at any second. For 3 days they shadowed the object from a safe distance, matching its speed, watching its behavior. It made no aggressive moves, no sudden turns, no energy spikes. It just drifted, like it was waiting, or observing. Then, without warning, it slowed. Not by firing thrusters, there were no visible exhaust plumes, but by some kind of internal field that bent space around it. The Persephone's instruments went haywire for a few seconds. Gravity sensors spiked, magnetometers spun, and then silence again. That's when the decision had to be made. "We need to know what it is," said the science officer, voice tight with a mix of fear and excitement. "We scan it," the commander replied. "Passive only. No active pulses, but passive scans returned almost nothing. The hull, if it even had a hull, absorbed or deflected every signal." Frustration grew. Tension built in the cramped bridge. Finally, after another 12 hours of radio silence from the object, the commander gave the order. One low-power LiDAR pulse. Just enough to get a surface reading. Harmless. Standard procedure. The moment the pulse hit the alien vessel, everything changed. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a weapon firing, but the Persephone shuddered like it had hit an invisible wall. Lights flickered. Consoles went dark. The artificial gravity stuttered, sending loose tools floating midair before snapping back down. Worst of all, comms died. Completely. Not just static. Total blackout. Even the emergency beacon was silent. Inside the ship, panic was quiet but real. No one shouted. No one ran. But you could feel it in the way people held their breath, in the way fingers hovered over manual override switches. The alien ship hadn't attacked. At least not in any way humans understood. But it had reacted strongly to being touched by human technology. And then, as suddenly as it had gone dark, the Persephone's systems began to reboot. One by one, screens flickered back to life. Sensors came online. But the alien vessel? It was already moving again, faster now, heading deeper into the outer system. And it left behind something strange. A faint, repeating signal embedded in the ship's own data logs. Not a message in any language, but a pattern. Mathematical, precise, almost musical. The commander knew what she had to do. She bypassed the damaged comms relay and triggered the ship's last resort emergency burst. A tightly focused laser transmission aimed straight at the nearest UN listening post near Saturn. It carried only coordinates, timestamps, sensor logs, and one line of text. Unknown vessel. Non-hostile behavior until scanned. Reacted with unknown energy field. No casualties. Recommend full alert. Do not approach without linguistics and physics teams. She sent it 3 times, just in case. Then she sat back, staring out the viewport at the receding shape of the alien ship, now just a speck against the star field. Her hands were steady, but her heart pounded. She'd followed protocol. She hadn't fired. She hadn't threatened. But something had gone wrong anyway, and she knew, deep in her gut, that this moment would change everything. Because out here, at the edge of human reach, humanity had finally met something else. And that something hadn't come to talk. It hadn't come to fight. It had just arrived. And in doing so, it had already rewritten the rules. Back on Earth, the message arrived 12 hours later. Buried in routine data streams, it was almost overlooked. But when the duty officer at UN Interstellar Command saw the words unknown vessel and non-human response, he didn't hesitate. He woke his superior, who woke the Secretary General's office. Within the hour, every deep space defense asset was placed on high alert. No one knew what the alien ship wanted. No one knew if it was alone. But one thing was certain. Humanity was no longer alone in the dark. And the silence that had lasted for thousands of years was finally broken. Not with a bang, not with a greeting, but with a single, cautious pulse of light. And a reaction no one could explain. The galaxy hadn't trembled yet, but it was holding its breath. And somewhere out past the ice giants, a human warship floated in the quiet. Its crew watching the stars with new eyes, wondering if they'd just made first contact. Or started a war before they even knew the other side's name. Within hours of the emergency signal from the Persephone, the solar system shifted into high gear. Not with panic, at least not openly, but with the cold, methodical urgency of a military machine that had trained for this moment for decades. Deep space docks near Mars spun to life. Fuel depots opened their valves. Crews were pulled from leave, some still half asleep, and rushed onto waiting warships. Orders crackled over secure channels. All vessels to Kuiper intercept. Code Theta 9. Repeat, Theta 9. 3 human warships answered the call. The Aegis, broad and armored like a floating fortress. The Valkyrie, sleek and fast, built for hit-and-run tactics. And the Chimera, newer, experimental, packed with sensors and stealth tech. Each carried crews hardened by years of skirmishes. Over water rights on Mars. Over mining claims in the asteroid belt. Over who controlled the oxygen pipelines on Europa. They knew war. They just never expected it to come from beyond the stars. By the time they reached the outer system, the alien vessel was still there, hovering near the orbit of a dead ice moon. It hadn't moved aggressively. It hadn't broadcast threats. But to the captains watching from their bridges, its very stillness felt like a challenge. In human history, silence from an unknown force usually meant trouble was coming. Back on Earth, politicians argued in hushed, tense rooms. Some wanted to send scientists. Others demanded weapons be readied. But the military had already made up its mind. First contact protocols existed, yes, but they were written for peaceful meetings, not for encounters where a human ship got knocked offline by something that looked like a smooth, obsidian teardrop floating in space. The lead ship, the Aegis, took point. Its captain, someone who'd lost half their crew during the Ceres blockade years ago, wasn't taking chances. They'd seen what happened when you waited too long. So when the alien ship suddenly lit up with strange pulsing lights along its surface and began broadcasting a complex signal, the human fleet didn't see a greeting. They saw a targeting sequence. The signal was beautiful in a way. It wove together prime numbers, atomic frequencies, even snippets of Earth's own radio broadcast from the 20th century, like it had been listening for a long time. But the warship crews weren't trained to hear beauty. They were trained to spot threats. And to them, this was a threat dressed in math. After tense minutes of debate over secure comms, the decision was made. Fire a warning shot. Not a missile. Not a laser. Just a small kinetic slug, basically a chunk of tungsten, launched on a path that would zip harmlessly past the alien ship's bow. The idea was simple. Show strength, show control, show we're not afraid. In human conflicts, it often worked. Ships backed down. Fighters broke off. But this wasn't a human conflict. The moment the slug left the railgun, everything changed. The alien vessel didn't dodge. It didn't fire back in the way humans understood. Instead, it released something no human weapon could match. A ripple in space itself. Not an explosion, but a sudden invisible wave that bent gravity, twisted magnetic fields, and tore through the Chimera like it was made of tissue paper. Hull plates buckled. Internal compartments collapsed. The ship didn't explode, it just folded. 1 second it was there. The next it was a broken, silent wreck tumbling slowly in the dark. No one on the Chimera had time to scream. The system shut down so fast the crew probably didn't even feel it. On the other ships, alarms blared. Officers stared in disbelief. They'd seen ships destroyed before, but never like this. Never by something that didn't fire a single projectile, didn't release a single warhead. It was like the alien ship had reached into the fabric of reality and pinched. But here's the thing no one realized yet. The aliens weren't attacking. Not on purpose. To them, the kinetic slug wasn't a warning. It was an act of raw, senseless violence. In their culture, manipulating matter at high speed without resonance or harmony was the ultimate aggression, like throwing a rock at someone's face during a peace talk. Their response wasn't a weapon. It was a reflex, a defensive pulse meant to disable, not destroy. They hadn't known human ships were so fragile, but the damage was done. The Chimera was gone. 23 lives snuffed out in an instant, and now the human fleet was scared, angry, and convinced they were facing a hostile force far more advanced than they'd imagined. The alien ship, meanwhile, did something unexpected. It stopped broadcasting. Its lights dimmed. And then, slowly, it began to retreat, back toward the Oort cloud, the distant shell of icy rocks that marked the edge of the sun's influence. It didn't chase. It didn't threaten. It just left as if ashamed. But in the minds of the human commanders, retreat looked like regrouping, like it was going to bring more. Back on Earth, news of the Chimera's loss leaked before the military could contain it. Within hours, it was everywhere. Social feeds exploded. News channels ran nonstop coverage. Some called it an unprovoked attack. Others whispered that humanity had brought it on itself by poking the unknown. Governments scrambled to respond. Emergency sessions were called. Defense budgets tripled overnight. And out in the cold dark, the remaining warships held position. Their crews were quiet. No one celebrated. No one joked. They just stared at the wreckage of the Chimera, drifting like a ghost, and wondered what kind of war they'd just stepped into. The alien ship was gone, but its message, whether intended or not, had been received loud and clear. Humans were not the most powerful beings in the galaxy. And their weapons? They might as well be throwing stones. The real fear wasn't that the aliens would come back with an armada. It was that they might not come back at all. That they'd decided humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable, and simply cut them off forever. To be left alone in the universe, not because you're safe, but because you're too violent to trust, that was a different kind of horror. And so, as the warships turned back toward the inner system, they carried more than grief. They carried doubt. Doubt about their own assumptions. Doubt about their readiness. Doubt about whether humanity deserved a place among the stars if this was how they handled first contact. The galaxy hadn't trembled from weapons fire. It trembled from misunderstanding. And the worst part? Neither side even knew what the other was trying to say. News of the encounter spread faster than any ship could fly. One moment, Earth was going about its usual business. Commuters on maglev trains. Kids in floating classrooms over the Pacific. Farmers tending algae vats on the moon. The next, every screen, every public feed. Every private message channel was flashing the same headline. First contact. Warship lost, aliens real. At first, people didn't believe it. Too many hoaxes over the years. Too many sci-fi shows. But then came the footage, grainy, real, terrifying. The Chimera, 1 second whole, the next crumpled like foil. No explosion, no fire. Just silence and ruin. That's when the world stopped pretending. Governments reacted fast, but not together. The Pan-Asian Alliance called an emergency summit and demanded immediate retaliation. We cannot appear weak, their broadcast declared. If they think we're easy prey, they'll come for our colonies next. Meanwhile, the Euro-African Union pushed for restraint. This was a misunderstanding, their leaders insisted. We must not turn fear into war. Mars, still nursing old wounds from Earth's control, declared it would handle its own defense, meaning it shut its orbital gates and stopped sharing intel. On the streets, people were split too. Some built shrines to the lost crew of the Chimera. Others burned effigies of space demons. Conspiracy theories bloomed like weeds. The UN staged it to control us. The aliens are angels sent to judge us. The whole thing's a distraction from the water crisis on Titan. No one knew what to trust, but out beyond the planets, something else was happening. Deep space telescopes, some military, some civilian, began picking up movement near Proxima Centauri. Not one ship this time, dozens, a whole group moving in a slow, deliberate pattern. To human eyes trained on centuries of warfare, it looked like a fleet. A battle formation. The kind you'd use before an invasion. Panic spiked. Earth's orbital defense grid powered up for the first time since the Martian secession. Factories on Ceres switched from building solar panels to forging missile casings. Parents pulled kids out of off-world schools, and in quiet rooms across the system, generals ran war simulations. None of them ended well. Every scenario showed human ships outmatched, outmaneuvered, erased in seconds by that same silent pulse that had taken the Chimera. But not everyone saw an enemy. Aboard the Valkyrie, now stationed near the edge of human-controlled space, the commander who'd first spotted the alien ship, the one from the Persephone, was finally allowed to speak to the Solar Defense Council. She didn't ask for weapons. She didn't beg for peace. She just played the data again. "Listen," she said, her voice calm but firm. "When we scanned them, they didn't fire. When we shot that slug, they didn't chase us, they ran. And look at their signal, it wasn't a threat. It was full of math, music, even old Earth radio waves. They've been listening to us for years, maybe decades. They knew who we were before we knew they existed." She paused, letting that sink in. They didn't destroy the Chimera on purpose. They reacted like someone flinching when a stranger throws a rock at their head. To them, that kinetic round wasn't a warning. It was an act of war. And their weapon? It might have just been a shield, a reflex, but fear doesn't listen to logic. Not when lives are gone, not when the unknown is staring you in the face. So the Council approved Project Iron Curtain, a massive ring of automated missile platforms along the outer edge of the solar system. Each one loaded with relativistic kill vehicles, capable of striking targets light minutes away. The idea was simple. If anything alien comes near, blow it out of the sky before it gets close enough to react, the commander argued. She said it would only confirm the aliens' worst fears, that humans were violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. But her voice was drowned out by louder ones that spoke of security, of strength, of never being caught off guard again. Meanwhile, the alien fleet, if that's what it was, kept coming. Not faster, not slower, just steady, like they had all the time in the universe, back on Earth. Schools started teaching kids about xeno-defense. Corporations sold alien-proof shelters. Most were just reinforced basements with extra filters. And in the quiet corners of the net, a new movement grew. People calling themselves harmonists. They believed the aliens weren't here to fight, but to teach. That humanity's obsession with weapons was what scared them off. They posted decoded fragments of the alien signal, set to soft music with messages like, "They speak in stars." Why do we answer with steel? Most people mocked them, called them dreamers. But deep down, even the generals wondered, what if they're right? Because the truth was, no one knew what the aliens wanted. Not really. Maybe they were explorers. Maybe they were refugees. Maybe they were just curious. But after the Chimera, curiosity had become a luxury humanity couldn't afford. And so the solar system held its breath. Ships patrolled in silence. Families hugged a little tighter before saying goodbye to loved ones heading off-world. And every night millions looked up at the stars, not with wonder anymore, but with worry. The aliens hadn't fired a second shot. They hadn't sent a threat. But their very existence had shattered the illusion that humans were alone, safe, in control. Now every shadow in the sky felt like a threat. Every silence felt like a countdown. And the worst part? The aliens might be feeling the exact same way about us. Because out near Proxima Centauri, as their vessels gathered, they weren't preparing for war either. They were sending their best diplomats, their most patient minds, hoping to understand why a species that sang songs about love and peace would answer a hello with a bullet. But by the time they arrived, humanity might already have its finger on the trigger. The alien ships arrived near Proxima Centauri not with fanfare but with caution. They formed a wide open circle, no sharp angles, no aggressive lines. To human eyes trained on war games and fleet tactics, it still looked like a threat. But this time someone was watching closely enough to notice the difference. Aboard the UNS Concord, a new ship built not for battle, but for listening, the commander who'd first encountered the aliens sat in the quiet hum of the bridge. This vessel carried no missiles, no railguns. Instead, it held linguists, physicists, and a team trained in nonverbal communication. Its hull was lined with emitters capable of sending not just radio waves, but vibrations, light pulses, even controlled gravity ripples, anything that might echo the way the aliens seemed to speak. For days, the Concord held position, matching the slow drift of the alien formation. No one fired. No one moved too fast. The human fleet stayed back, tense but ordered to hold fire unless attacked. It was the first real test of whether humanity could choose curiosity over fear. Then, disaster almost struck. A private vessel, one of those freelance security ships hired by Earth-based corporations, suddenly broke from the edge of the human line. It wasn't military. It didn't answer to the Solar Defense Council. And it carried a grudge. Someone on board had lost family on the Chimera. They didn't believe in diplomacy. They believed in revenge. Before anyone could stop them, the ship fired, a single high-velocity round aimed straight at the largest alien vessel. Time seemed to freeze, but the aliens didn't react like before. This time they were ready. Instead of unleashing that terrifying pulse, they moved with impossible grace. A shimmering field bloomed around their ship, not to destroy, but to deflect. The projectile curved away, harmless, vanishing into deep space. Then, with surgical precision, the aliens targeted the attacker's engines. Not to kill, but to disable. A soft pulse, and the private ship went dark, drifting silently, its crew alive but stranded. No one died. No ship exploded. But the message was clear. We could have ended you. We chose not to. That moment changed everything. On the Concorde, the commander didn't hesitate. She activated the ship's experimental comms array and began broadcasting, not in words, but in patterns. She sent the hydrogen line frequency, the universal signature of the most common element in the cosmos. She layered it with the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, the rhythm of a human heartbeat. Then gently she added the same harmonic tones the aliens had used in their first signal. It was like knocking on a door with music instead of fists. For hours, nothing happened. The alien ships remained still. The human fleet held its breath. Then slowly one vessel peeled away from the group, not fast, not threatening, just approaching. It stopped a few kilometers from the Concorde. A soft glow pulsed along its surface, rhythmic, calm. And then through the Concorde's quantum-linked sensors, a new signal arrived. Not just math this time, not just patterns. It carried meaning. The linguists worked fast, cross-referencing every known structure, every possible interpretation. What they found stunned them. The aliens weren't just saying hello. They were apologizing. In their own way, through resonant frequencies and layered harmonics, they expressed regret for the loss of the Chimera. They explained, through symbols that mirrored cause and effect, that their reaction had been instinctive, not intentional. And then came the hardest part to translate. We watched your world for 87 of your years. We heard your music, your cries, your laughter. We hoped you had grown past war, but your actions told us otherwise. The commander of the Concorde sat in silence for a long time after that. Then she recorded a response, not with weapons, not with threats, but with truth. She sent images of hospitals, of children planting trees on Mars, of people sharing food after disasters. She included recordings of lullabies, of protest songs calling for peace, of scientists working together across borders. And she added one simple line encoded in prime numbers. We are not all the same. Some of us choose violence, but many of us choose better. The alien vessel pulsed again, this time softer, almost like a sigh. Aboard the Concorde, a young linguist whispered, "They understand." And for the first time since the encounter began, real communication started. Over the next few days, messages flowed back and forth slowly, carefully, like two strangers learning to trust each other in the dark. The aliens revealed their name for themselves, not in sound, but in a concept that translated roughly to those who listen. Humans called them the Cathari, after an old Earth word for echo. They explained that their society valued harmony above all, balance in nature, in thought, in action. To them, launching unguided matter at high speed was like screaming in a sacred space. It broke the natural order. That's why the kinetic round had triggered such a strong reaction. In return, humans explained their own history, how war had shaped them, how fear had driven them to build walls before building bridges. It wasn't an excuse, just an explanation. And then came the hardest truth of all. The Cathari admitted they weren't alone out there. Other species watched from the shadows. Some had tried to contact humanity centuries ago, but turned away when they saw Earth's wars, its pollution, its endless cycles of violence. The Cathari had stayed longer, hoping things had changed. The Chimera incident nearly convinced them to leave forever. But the Concorde's message, the lullabies, the shared meals, the quiet acts of kindness gave them pause. Now, they offered a choice, a neutral zone. No weapons, no warships, just observers from both sides watching, learning, talking. If humanity respected the boundary, dialogue could continue. If not, they would vanish and likely warn others to do the same. Back on Earth, the news of this fragile connection sparked new debates. Hardliners called it surrender. Idealists called it hope. But out near Proxima, the commander of the Concorde made her choice. She powered down all non-essential systems, turned off the ship's defensive screens, and sent one final signal: we accept. And in that moment, not with a bang, not with a treaty signed in ink, but with a shared frequency humming through the void, humanity took its first real step. Not as conquerors, not as victims, but as neighbors. See, the treaty wasn't signed with pens or pressed fingerprints. There were no grand halls, no flags raised side by side. Instead, it happened in the quiet dark between stars, sealed not with words but with silence. The kind of silence that comes after fear has passed and trust is just beginning to grow. Human and alien ships drifted near Alpha Centauri B. Engines off, weapons cold, broadcasting only gentle pulses of light and sound. They called it the Silent Accord. And for the first time in human history, we weren't shouting into the void. We were listening. Back home, the change was slow but real. Schools stopped teaching alien contact as a military scenario and started including Cathari resonance patterns in science class. Kids learned to sing simple math sequences using handheld emitters, giggling when their signals made classroom sensors hum in response. On Mars, engineers studied the data from that defensive pulse, not to copy it as a weapon, but to build better shields for deep space travel, ones that bent radiation instead of blocking it. Even the old war factories began shifting. Some started making communication arrays instead of missile casings, not because they had to, but because people demanded it. But the biggest shift wasn't in technology, it was in how people saw themselves. For centuries, humanity had acted like the universe was empty, like Earth was the only story that mattered. Now we knew we were being watched, not by gods or monsters, but by others, beings who valued harmony, who had chosen patience over force even after we'd shown them our worst side. That knowledge changed something deep inside the human spirit. It wasn't instant peace. There were still arguments, still greed, still fear. But now, whenever someone called for violence just in case, someone else would ask, what would the Cathari think? The Cathari didn't stay hidden. A single observer vessel remained near the edge of the agreed neutral zone, a silent witness, not a guard. And once a month, the Concorde would meet it, exchanging data, music, even simple stories. No one rushed. No one demanded answers. They just showed up again and again, proving that showing up was enough. Meanwhile, whispers began arriving from deeper space. Faint signals, strange patterns, none matching human or Cathari signatures. Other species were watching. Some sent cautious greetings, just a pulse here, a harmonic echo there. Others stayed silent, waiting to see what humanity would do next. The galaxy wasn't rushing to welcome us, but it wasn't shutting us out either. We'd been given a second chance, and everyone knew it. On Earth, cities lit up with public art displays showing the shape of the first Cathari ship, not as a threat, but as a visitor. Museums built exhibits called The Day We Were Seen, and in homes across the system, families gathered not just to watch the stars, but to wonder, who else is out there? And what will they think of us tomorrow? The commander of the Concorde never returned to Earth. She stayed out in the quiet, now serving not as a soldier but as a bridge. Her ship became a floating embassy, always ready, always open. She spent her days not preparing for battle but learning how to shape sound into meaning, how to read emotion in light patterns, how to sit in stillness without feeling the need to fill it with noise. She missed rain. She missed the smell of soil after a storm, but she didn't regret her choice. Because out here in the space between suns, she was helping write a new chapter for humanity. One where we weren't defined by what we could destroy, but by what we could understand. There were still hard days. Moments when old instincts flared, when a sensor glitch made a human captain reach for a weapon, or when a misread signal sparked panic on a colony world. But each time someone remembered the Chimera. Someone remembered the private ship that fired out of grief, And someone else would say, wait, let's listen first, and they did. No one claimed the crisis was over. The galaxy was still vast, still full of unknowns, but the trembling that had started with that first encounter, the deep, quiet shake that ran through every human heart when they realized they weren't alone, hadn't stopped. It had just changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was awe. It was responsibility. It was the weight of knowing that every choice we made, every word we sent into the dark, was being heard by someone else. The war never came. Not because the aliens were weak or because humans were suddenly perfect, but because both sides chose, again and again, to believe the other might be worth understanding. And so, in the endless night between the stars, two very different kinds of beings kept showing up slowly, carefully, humbly, learning how to share the same sky without tearing it apart. The galaxy still held its breath, but now it was waiting not for an explosion but for a conversation. And somewhere out there in a ship humming with the soft song of two worlds trying to speak the same language, humanity finally began to answer, not with steel, but with hope.